My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Well, we've been taking a look in our study of 1 Corinthians 15 and the resurrection. And we've been focused on the fact that Christ is said by Paul to be the first fruit. I've been sharing with you that Paul simply could not be saying that Christ was the first to be raised from physical death. I've had some people contact me and say, well, Don, what exactly is your point? Well, I've tried to communicate that the point is, we are told by virtually all futurists, Christ was the first to be raised from the dead, and that means that his post-resurrection, pre-ascension body was his glorified, immortal, incorruptible body, the exact same kind of body that we will have at the resurrection at the so-called end of time. The problem with that is, as I've been sharing with you, the New Testament is very clear in setting forth the reality that Christ's post-resurrection, pre-ascension body was unchanged. It was the exact same precise mortal body that he had prior to his death, his burial, and the resurrection. In other words, it was not his glorified body. So if one argues that Christ's post-resurrection, pre-ascension body is the body that we supposedly get at the end of time, then that means that we get an unchanged body. And by the way, that's proven, of course, by the fact that Jesus showed doubting Thomas his side, his hands, his feet, and said, and now those are the wounds that he had on the cross, and he said, touch me, feel me, see that it is I, even myself. Now, folks, if we're going to get the same kind of body at the so-called end of time that correlates and parallels Jesus' body, then his resurrected body had wounds, had defects, had flaws. Does that mean that we are going to be raised in an immortal body that still has defects and flaws? Now, if you're going to say, well, there's Jesus' body, look at him, we're going to be like that. Well, his body was still wounded. So, if we're going to extrapolate, and if we're going to make the application, Jesus' resurrected body is like our resurrected body, then that means that we're going to have the same defects, the same flaws, the same problems, the same visible signs in our physical body that we had before we went into the grave. And yet that's not what hardly anybody believes. They say, oh, no, we'll have perfectly restored bodies. Well, Jesus' body was not restored. And so the point of fact is, the arguments that are made on Jesus' body, on the one hand claiming that it was immortal, incorruptible, undefilable, transformed, all at the same time taking note that his body had the same wounds on it that he had when he was put into the grave, becomes extremely problematic for the traditional views of resurrection. If Christ's physical resurrection was the prototype, the first of what we are going to be like, then what we are going to be like must reflect what he was like. And that means he had physical flaws, he had physical wounds. Therefore, we will retain our physical flaws, wounds, defects. What does that do for those who've been beheaded? What does that do for those who've been consumed in fire? What does that do for everyone who've been dismembered, consumed by sharks, consumed by whatever? Folks, these are not light-hearted objections. They're based upon the argument that is made about Jesus' resurrected pre-ascension body. And so I hope that you will take these things to heart. I hope you can see some of the problems in the traditional view. And as we move forward in our study of 1 Corinthians 15, I think you're going to see more and more problems with the traditional view of this great chapter. For instance, we're going to begin our investigation of Paul's statement where he says, "Then comes the end." Well, let me just say this. The traditional views of eschatology have, quote, "the end at the end of time," or they have it at the end of the current age. But if the Bible does not teach such a thing as the end of time, and if the Bible does not teach the end of the current Christian age, then all futurist views of 1 Corinthians 15 are completely and totally falsified. And you are going to be absolutely amazed to discover in the evidence that I'm going to share with you that the Bible nowhere teaches the end of time or the end of the current Christian age. So we will see you on the flip side.